Tonight I am going to be talking about the chapter in Mountain Dharma as taught by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, the chapter that is titled The Generation of Bodhichitta, which is the Great Path of Awakening. Now, the reason why Bodhichitta is called the Great Path of Awakening is that once you have generated bodhicitta, it is certain that that person will attain Buddhahood. The only uncertain thing about it is how long it will take before you attain Buddhahood. But it is extremely important to generate this aspiration to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. You cannot attain Buddhahood without this aspiration. So this is how we begin this chapter. So very simply here, quote, "The generation of bodhicitta is the moment at which the practice of awakening or Buddhahood begins." And to emphasize this in another way, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche or Karma Chagme say that bodhicitta is the substance of the path of awakening. And hence that is what makes it the great path of awakening. All Buddhas began as ordinary human beings. So all Buddhas have generated this aspiration, bodhicitta, to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. All of them have done this. And I want to point out in Vajrayana, some of the prayers and aspirations do not talk about Buddhahood. They talk about the state of Vajradhara. Like our Mahamudra lineage supplication begins, Dorje Changshan Telo Narodang, great Vajradhara, Talopa, Naropa, and so forth. And it ends with, "May I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara." So this is different than Buddhahood. And the reason is that Vajradhara has never been confused. Vajradhara represents primordial wisdom, being enlightened from the beginningless beginning and never having to travel the path to Buddhahood. So it's important to make that distinction, or at least understand that distinction. There are two forms of Bodhisattva vows, and Bodhisattva vows would be a formal ceremony where there is a preceptor that is giving the vows, and that you would be receiving the vows. The traditions are the tradition of extensive deeds, and these was passed on from the Buddha to Maitreya to Asanga. And it's a very elaborate ceremony. It takes 2 days for this ceremony to be completed. And there's a lot of preparation that you need to do to be able to take these vows. It would be, well, you could take monastic vows. You could take lay vows. You study the Mahayana teachings so you know what you're getting into. And then, of course, you try to generate a lot of merit. So you make offerings and do other sorts of things that accumulate merit. And you need the merit to receive the vows. And the actual ceremony is considered momentous for the person that's receiving the vows. And that is, at least the word momentous is used in the book, the English translation of what Rinpoche taught. There is all of this preparation. Rinpoche uses the example that if you are going to invite a universal monarch into your home, you would do a lot of preparation for it. You would certainly clean up your house. You might repaint. You might actually do some extensive renovation. Universal monarch are very important. Maybe a good example for us would be if you're going to invite a very, very important person. Could be, well, let's say you were going to invite the Dalai Lama into your house. You would do a lot of things before you actually had him walk through the door. If he showed up, he doesn't accept just any invitation. So anyway, the idea is that it's like this and that you have to do a lot of preparation. You have these individual preparation vows that you would have taken some of them and kept up the vows. You will have studied the Mahayana teachings and understand the implications and the significance of these teachings. And then, of course, you would make offerings. So this is another way to talk about this. I was present one time when Rinpoche offered these vows at KTD. I don't know if he has offered them at other times, other places, but I know he did offer them this one time, and we all spent a lot of time in the shrine room with Rinpoche talking, giving teachings, and then chanting. It was a full weekend. So the other type of Bodhisattva vows are the tradition of the profound view. Again, the first one is extensive deeds. So the profound view is passed from the Buddha to Manjushri to Nagarjuna. And this is the one that is commonly given, the usual one. And here, Bodhichitta is seen as a seed, and that it will survive no matter what soil it is planted on. So it is felt that anyone, quote, who sincerely wishes to generate it can participate, end quote. So if you are sincere about wanting to generate bodhicitta, then you can participate. So I'm not aware of Rinpoche ever telling anybody, no, I'm not going to give the vows to you. When it is given this profound view, then it's a much lower bar. And the idea is it's good for the person to receive them. And it might take a few lifetimes before that seed sprouts and starts to grow, but it will because the aspiration of Bodhichitta is very strong. So basically, the two traditions are for the motivations and aptitudes of different sentient beings. Some, the extensive deeds they'll relate better to that, and others, the profound view will work better. The vows must be given by a person who holds the vows themselves and maintains one of these lineages that I have mentioned here. It is good to do a short version of the vows and retake them every day, because we're constantly going to be doing things. Rinpoche talked about bending or denting the vows as opposed to breaking the vows. So we're constantly denting or bending our vows, and so it's essential to retake them as frequently as possible. And just about all of our Vajrayana practices have a short version of the Bodhisattva vow in them. Same thing with refuge vow, that if you do Chen Rezi, forearm Chen Rezi, it has both the refuge vow in it and also the Bodhichitta vow in it. So retaking it at home restores it immediately, Rinpoche says, and Karma Chagme obviously says this too. It's important to retake the vows at home, but also it restores it immediately, and so there's no point in going around thinking to yourself that, oh, I screwed up, I did it again, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless, I'm a wreck, da 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 da, because as soon as you take it again, that it's restored. Bodhicitta is compared with a crop in the northern continent of Uttarakura. And this goes back to the mandala practice, which I'll get into in a future class. But there it is said that when you harvest a crop, immediately it regrows on the spot. So that, for instance, if you are harvesting a sweet corn, you pick the sweet corn, and immediately there's another one. Not too bad. So that's how it is described here. If you, shall we say, violate the vow, that immediately taking the vow at home by yourself alone, and you're back where you started from before you violated it. They're fresh. So this aspect keeps your vows from deteriorating, and it keeps your bodhicitta actually increasing. There are confessions that can be done. If any of you have ever done a Nyungne, there is the 35 Buddhas that is done once a day in Nyungne for purification practices. And then there's also a shorter prayer that begins Lama Dorje Zinpa, that is repeated 3 times every time you chant that section. So there is the Vajrasattva practice that is done as part of Nundro practice, and so forth. So there's lots of different ways that if you have engaged in very serious violations of the vows, that you can still purify it. It's nothing to get upset about. This might seem a little bit harsh, but it's like, okay, so you violated it. You're not the first one. It happens. And what's more important than getting down on yourself about having broken the vow is to do something about it, to refresh it. So retake it, do a confession, and then move on. So regardless of what you have done to violate the vows, it can be purified and the vows can be renewed. This is my own example, but there are deer all over the place around here this year. And even in a year when there haven't been nearly so many, I've been here 53 years and I've had a lot of deer car collisions. Well, as my insurance agent said one time, you've got a favorite body shop, don't you? That agent said that because this wasn't the first time that I had talked to him about deer damage to my car. And yes, I do. And I went there and got the dents taken care of. This is just kind of my own silliness, but look at renewing the vows as like taking your car to the body shop and getting it fixed, getting the dents knocked out. As was said at the beginning here, that once you have generated bodhicitta, you become a child of the Buddha, and it is certain that you will become a fully enlightened Buddha at some point. Rinpoche compares this to being born into a royal family. You are a prince or a princess at birth and a member of the royal family. You don't have the power of an adult in the royal family, but you have the potential, and you are honored and respected on the basis of that connection, that potential. Now, bodhicitta has different aspects to it. The first one is aspiration bodhicitta. That is the wish, the intention to attain fully enlightened, to become a fully enlightened Buddha. And you're doing this to liberate others. You're wishing that you can attain Buddhahood so you can then liberate others. Now, implementation bodhicitta is, quote, the actual accomplishment of that wish generated by going through the process of accomplishing or bringing about your own Buddhahood. Shantideva makes this distinction, which is that the aspiration is like looking at a map, aspiration bodhicitta, and the implementation bodhicitta is when you are actually on the path, walking on it, or traveling on it. So that is how the difference between aspiration and implementation is described. The difference between looking at a map and studying it and actually being the path. Again, to put it in the 21st century, it might be a map and being in your car with a GPS on, that you're actually traveling on the path, you're doing something about it. So what is practiced on the Mahayana path is the six perfections. Generosity is first, and these are progressive. The next is discipline or ethical conduct. And it's important in Buddhism that discipline does not have the element of punishment in it that it frequently does in the West. Discipline is following good ethical conduct. Then if you trip or otherwise make mistakes or behave in a way that you have regret, well, then you purify it. There's nothing that says punishing yourself or being punished because you have broken your vows. So the first one is generosity, then ethical conduct or discipline, then patience, third, diligence, joyful exertion is fourth, meditative concentration is fifth, and the last one is wisdom. And as you practice the first five, gradually you develop more wisdom. And you have, you might say, worldly wisdom, and then you have primordial wisdom. And you accumulate the worldly wisdom, but eventually, as you travel the path, it becomes primordial wisdom, which has always been. Now, besides practicing the six perfections, you want to have the aspiration and the motivation of why we're doing these things. And also you want to have a proper dedication, dedicating the merit so that all beings may benefit from this aspirational bodhicitta and engagement bodhicitta. Now, the vows themselves come from the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Shantideva. It's considered a classic in Tibetan Buddhism and the Mahayana tradition. And the vows are literally direct quotes from the text. They are in the book here, and I'm just going to read them. Quote, until I reach the essence of awakening, I take refuge in the Buddhas, and in the same way, the Dharma and the assembly of Bodhisattvas. This is Mahayana refuge, which I talked about a little while ago. Then, continuing, just as the Buddhas of the past have done, I generate the intention to attain supreme awakening for the benefit of all beings. And just as they have gone through all the stages of training of a bodhisattva, in the same way I will go through all those stages. End of quote. So you have the aspiration, bodhicitta, and then you have the commitment to implement these aspirations. Now, the commitment of the Bodhisattva vows are to, first of all, rejoice in all the virtues done by others. There is a lot of virtue that is accomplished every day in the world. And whenever you become aware of this, rejoice in it, that other people are working to benefit sentient beings. I just want to point out that that's really important, to rejoice in what others are doing to benefit sentient beings. And when you do that, you accumulate the merit that others have accumulated. So if someone has done some very virtuous activity, if you rejoice in that, it's like you did the activity. Very wise to rejoice in the virtuous activity of all sentient beings. You'll get to the goal of complete Buddhahood much more quickly. Then the second point is dedicate all of your virtue, whatever virtuous actions you have engaged in, even just a very small amount of it, to your own attainment of Buddhahood, so that once you are there, you can work tirelessly for the benefit of all beings. That is an important point there. Now, there are 3 types of motivation that are mentioned here that are important to keep in mind. There is the king-like, the boatman-like, and the shepherd-like. To go over these very briefly. The king-like is a prince that is destined to be a king, will have to undergo all kinds of training so that he or she would be a queen. If they are going to rule, they need to have the abilities, the knowledge, the wisdom to be able to do this properly to benefit their citizens. So you would go through a lot of training in everything from, you might say, the conventional wisdom of the kingdom, and you also would be training in martial arts, diplomacy, and so on and so forth. So then when you do take the throne and are given a crown, now you know how to benefit your subjects. So that is this king-like motivation, which is, I'm going to become a fully enlightened Buddha, and then from that place I will liberate my sentient beings to the best of my ability. And since I'm a Buddha, I will have a lot of ability. So the next one is the boatman-like motivation. And here a boatman, basically they have a boat that's quite small by Western standards, and they will take you from one side of a river to the other side of the river. And not many people can fit into this boat. So the boatman takes people from one shore to another shore. So this type of motivation is that you will be able to liberate a few people little by little. Then the third type of motivation is shepherd-like. And here you are not guiding beings to the other side. You're not preparing to take them to the other side. They are in poor health. They're considered to be in poor health, and they just need to have someone help them get to the other side. the other shore, and that you, as a person that has taken the Bodhisattva vows, then your aspiration is to have the ability of wisdom and knowledge and so forth, so that you don't take new duties that you can't handle. I'm kind of getting a little bit off track here. Let me start over. That with the shepherd, sheep, you don't lead sheep. You are behind them and you drive them forward, and they're always jumping around here and there. And we have the phrase herding cats, and it's a bit like that. You are behind them, and when they jump off to the right or to the left, you are there, you might say, chasing them back to the path. So you are the last one to get to the other side, because that's the way sheep behave. Here, you are not so concerned about yourself getting to the other side as you are getting others to the other side. It is said that actually this is the quickest way to get to the other side, because you are not all that concerned about you getting there. You're more concerned about others, but because you're doing that and more concerned about others, you'll get to the other side more quickly. So the aspiration of the shepherd, here is a quote from the book: "May I bring all beings to a state of Buddhahood and only thereafter attain it myself." So again, I talked about the training for the aspiration bodhicitta. The training for implementation bodhicitta goes back to the 6 perfections. Practice these according to your own abilities, Karma Chagme says. Avoid regret. That's an important point. Do your best and don't be so hard on yourself. We're trainees and we're going to be stumbling. It's just inevitable. You probably know this already, that working with sentient beings can be very difficult. Fellow human beings can be very difficult to get along with. And a lot of them, the last thing that they want is to have you mess with their lives. And maybe I'm being a little bit too blunt here, but people like going to the bars on Friday night around here and drinking beer and talking in a language that a bodhisattva would not use. And getting a person to be concerned about others might seem like an impossible task, but that's what your aspiration is. So it can be difficult work, but it's rewarding work. And the good thing is you've got lifetimes to accomplish this. Tonglen is an important practice here as well, that this will really help increase your bodhicitta. Tonglen is very simply exchanging yourself for others, that you do a visualization and you imagine that you are inhaling something from another person that is causing them to suffer. It could be almost anything. It could be greed. It could be very selfish or egotistical thinking or behavior, anger, and so on and so forth. And you try to remove that from another person by breathing it in, and then you exhale and imagine that you are giving that person something that you have that you really value strongly. You're giving that to the other person, and that it would be very beneficial for them to receive that. One of the more difficult aspects for many people in Tonglen would be you have a sick person and they're suffering greatly because of their illness. Do Tonglen with the illness, where you are imagining yourself when you're inhaling, sucking the illness out of that person and into your self, your body, your lungs. And when you exhale, you are giving them your health. This can make you very squeamish. I don't want to get sick. It's all fine and dandy that they are sick and I want them to be free of sickness, but I don't want to take that sickness from them. And you might say, put it in my pocket. Now, the thing is that unless you're a bodhisattva, you can't take the sickness away from them and take it on yourself. So it's a needless worry. Rinpoche told this story one time about a nomad in Tibet that had his herd of yak. Is a male animal, and had mostly the females, Dri, and they had an illness that was going through his herd, causing them a lot of, well, it was a digestive illness. And the closest thing that I can think of, and I don't know much about yaks, but cows get what's called scours, and it's a digestive illness, and their whole digestive system is out of whack and they can't keep food down. It's a bit like diarrhea. It really can be devastating to the herd, and animals can die from it. And so this nomad was very concerned. He went to a high lama and explained the problem, and he asked the lama to come and do prayers. So the lama went, and when he got there, they started a fire, with sticks of wood, and he sat down on the ground, and every so often, as the fire died down, he'd throw another stick into the fire. I don't know, he was there quite a while, and then eventually he got up and went back to the monastery. And of course, both the nomad and the lama's attendant were kind of going, what's going on here? So the next day, the nomad came to the monastery and told the lama, my herd is better. You cured them. And he was just overjoyed at the results. After the nomad left, the lama's attendant asked him, well, what did you do? And he said, well, I was doing Tonglen for the herd. And he said, and when I got up this morning, I had a little diarrhea, but that's over with now. So if you're a bodhisattva, yes, you could take on the illness of another person, but probably you're not a bodhisattva. And if you are a bodhisattva, you would be delighted to be able to help that way. So no problem, no worry. So anyway, when you're doing this Tonglen, this exchange, if it's illness that you are breathing in, if it's, let's say, suffering, just plain, can be anxiety, you're breathing it in, but it's a visualization. and it has no substance, and this air that you are imagining goes into your lungs, and since it's empty of inherent existence, it just disappears and it's gone. So no problem. And this is, again, a very, very powerful practice for bodhisattvas to do. If you can let go of your selfishness and become more concerned about others, it protects you from the aggression of others and from the difficulties in life. Again, quoting from the book here, you will attain Buddhahood quickly, and you will be reborn with an altruistic mind as a practicing bodhisattva in a very powerful position where you can help. So this is a little bit about Tonglen. Also, I'm going to share this story. When I started out practicing Tibetan Buddhism, I was the Sangha of Prangpa Rinpoche in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And they would have visiting teachers that had been, I should say that Prangpa Rinpoche died a week after my first meditation instruction, so I never had a chance to meet him. But there would be teachers that were students of Trungpa Rinpoche for a long time and had a lot of interaction with him that would come and do weekend programs. And there was this one teacher, I cannot tell you his name, I can't remember, but he had been a personal attendant to Trungpa Rinpoche. And he said this, that one day he went into, and Trungpa Rinpoche was partially paralyzed because of an auto accident. So he went into his room one day, and Trungpa Rinpoche was in bed, kind of leaning over the edge of the bed and vomiting into a bucket or a bowl there that was on the floor. And he said that it was really gross. It didn't look like your ordinary kind of vomit. This isn't very, what would I say, family-friendly talk. But anyway, what surprised him the most was that Trungpa Rinpoche was grinning as he was doing this. So he was very puzzled by what he saw. And at some point, maybe a year or two later, he was talking to another high Tibetan Rinpoche about this. And Rinpoche said, well, of course, Trungpa Rinpoche was a poison eater. And if you think about it, there are three poisons: anger, desire, and ignorance. So this is what a bodhisattva can do, is take that in from others, from the world, and then, in this case, get rid of it. Then there is the four immeasurables. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings rest in the great, there are a lot of different terms for it, great bliss, great happiness, which is without suffering or which is free of suffering. And may all sentient beings rest without being attached to those that are near and have aversion for those that are distant. So all of this is a very important part of the Mahayana path and the Bodhisattva vows.